again, welcome to the webinar series on pathways to prevention. I'm excited to host this webinar series along with the Pathways Statewide Steering Committee. Over the last 2 years, we've been really exploring the roots of violence and the barriers to health and safety. And so this year, we're really looking at what are the systems and organizations, and how can we work to change what's happening within those. So I'm really excited today to have a few folks joining us from the Juneau School District. The Juneau School District really has taken the lead, I think, as far as schools in our state, to look at their school through an equity lens. And they've developed some tools and resources on how to address equity within the Juneau School District. So today they're going to share kind of how they got started with the work and how they've been doing that work, as well as share some tools that others can use to start to do similar work. So I'm pleased to have Barbara Cadiente-Nelson, Andi Story, and Ted Wilson on the call. So I'm going to turn it over to them to further introduce themselves and share with you all the work that they've been doing in Juneau. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. This is Ted Wilson, Director of Teaching and Learning for the Juneau School District, and I was also previously a 4th and 5th grade teacher at Glacier Valley Elementary School, and I was also principal there for 11 years.
Hi, and this is Barbara Cadiente-Nelson. I'm a former teacher in the district, and when the work of equity became more intense, or at least began, I was the education director for Sea-Alaska Heritage Institute and served on the district-wide equity committee for the district as a community partner. And so I'm one of the original members of the district-wide equity committee, and now as an employee with the district today.
And I'm Andi Story, a Juneau School Board member who has been on the board for 12 years and has been working through this process and is very grateful to Ted and Barbara for all their work on this.
So the presentation we have, we prepared a lot of slides that can be a resource for you. We're not going to spend time on each one, but later on, if you wanted to look through them, you'll have that opportunity. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is, and it's the question that throughout our discussions and our processes has been a continued conversation, is, so what is equity, what is equality, and what does it look like, and how do we define it? And so this image is one of the representations that we found valuable in how we're trying to explain to our own staff and stakeholders. When we're talking about equity, it doesn't mean that everything is the same for everybody, but it's that we're meeting everyone at their need level and providing them what they need to have the success that everyone needs to be able to have as they go through the Juneau School District or works in the Juneau School District. So this is a school district profile. We have 2 comprehensive high schools, an alternative high school, 2 middle schools, 6 elementary schools, a charter school. Right now, Montessori Borealis is a program, but it's becoming its own school this coming August. We also have our Homebridge homeschool option. We also have a Tlingit Culture, Language, and Literacy program that is within one of our elementary schools. So we have, as far as what we're trying to do, we're thinking about each of those sites. We also have some associated sites that are working with students that may be either incarcerated or in some other type of program that we also have to consider as we're working through this. So the Board of Education has several indicators of success that they, in their work sessions and looking at our data and looking at our needs, have identified as places that they're going to collect data and look at the progress that we're making, or areas that they identify as areas that we need to put additional effort. Some of those are student achievement, our level of professional development, the attendance of both students and staff, our graduation rate, our standards, the resource allocation that we're making, and where are students at as far as their readiness to learn when they come in, whether it's preschool or kindergarten. So what I'm going to do next is highlight a few pieces of data, and then there's some data that I'm going to skip past for now, but you'd be able to look at it later. One of the things is looking within our program counts, who is it that we are looking at in our schools. So part of our data collection is ELL students, how are they distributed, how many are in each school, how are we going to allocate our staff so that we are equitable about the amount of access that students have to staff with a specialty that will meet their needs. Free and reduced lunch counts by school. One of the things that we look at with our Title I funding is how are we going to provide for schools that have a higher number of students that are low income, that being an area that we know affects students and their readiness when they get to school and their ongoing achievements. We want to make sure we're aware of the allocations that we're making to those schools and to those students. And then the Indian Studies program. We have grant money and district money that we are allocating to students that are Alaska Native, and so we need to make sure that we're tracking closely where those students are. And again, and the question, what year is this data from? I believe this is current year. Is this current year data?
Yes.
Yeah, current year data. But we also know that looking, and we have a program called Power School where we keep our student information, and that we know from the transient rates of our students that it's not just looking once a year, but looking consistently at the data to see where the students are. Many of the financial allocation decisions we make are made annually, of course, but we need to be looking to see what mid-course corrections we might need to make as far as our allocations of resources if we see that we've had big movements in our students at different schools. Part of what the school board and the school leadership looks at is our achievement data. There are several pieces of achievement data we look at. Some of it is state assessment, but state assessment is only measuring 3rd through 10th grade achievements. We need to look at achievement assessments that measure K through 12. The measures of achievement is one of those that we can use K through, and you see data here, K through 10. So we can track over several years how we're doing in reading, writing, and math. So that's an area that we use for our school action planning and looking at how we're allocating resources both at the district level, and then sites look to see how they're allocating within their walls.
This is Andi, and I'd like to say this is very helpful to the board, because if you just look at the averages, it does not tell you anything, the top line, the blue solid square line. But when I look to get our averages, it tells me who needs some extra supports and interventions.
So looking at the economically disadvantaged.
Yes, the 3 lower sites. When you have to break it down or your data does not help your work.
Right. So drilling down is one of the keys to looking at the data. Professional development, one of the things that the school board has asked us to make sure we're tracking is that staff is getting professionally developed in the areas that we know are going to have traction in the schools in moving student achievement. So this is percent of staff in reading and in math, and reading has been really solid, and we've seen over time we've needed to increase what we're doing in mathematics. And a graph you don't see here is writing, and that's another area that we know that we need to work on. But being intentional about collecting data is important for you to be able to make decisions about where you're going to put your allocation of resources. We look at attendance and see if we can move that needle, and so that's another piece of equity going back to the sites. And so what are you talking to students and parents, or are you talking to your staff about what is going on that's leading to these rates of attendance, and as a site, and then us collectively, what are things that we can do to address it? And again, we need to make sure that we're collecting and analyzing the data so that we can make decisions about what we're going to do to try to increase in those areas. Graduation rates been a very important indicator to the board, and as you can see on this graph, the overall on-time graduation rate has increased from 70 to 80%, but it's not enough just to know that overall, but you need to look at what is happening for each of our special populations or subpopulations. So we break that down and we look at, so if you are Asian, Caucasian, or Hispanic, it looks like you're graduating at a higher rate than if you're Alaska Native or if you're of 2 or more races. So that causes us to have the conversation and look further. So what is it that we need to provide that's going to increase the graduation rate for those other ethnicities? We would want to do the same thing for the ELL group and the special education group and the lower socioeconomic groups, and ask the same questions and look at what we can do to change the outcomes.
And we do look at those. I wanted to put this in context, our graduation rate. It is the highest of the 5 large districts, meaning Anchorage, Kenai, Ketchikan, Anchorage, Kenai, Mat-Su, Fairbanks, and Juneau. And we believe it's because we've concentrated interventions on some of our subpopulations that were not performing well, and we've done some resource allocation to add some supports.
So we also look at dropout rate, and then in the end we look at our resource allocation. This slide gives you the very large picture, but then within that there are some subcategories of resource allocation. But one of the things that the school board determined after looking at data over several years was one of the things that is going to have a big impact on student achievement is having teachers who are highly, not just federally highly qualified, but are very well trained in what they're doing. And so putting money into specific professional development opportunities that will help teachers better execute the curriculum and work with students so that they are successful. And then also putting a focus on instructional materials. What is it that the teacher needs to have to execute what they're doing in the classroom to the highest level possible? And so sometimes, especially, we know now we're in big budget crisis mode across the state. It's easy to cut things like professional learning and instructional materials because They're not, you know, you talk about cutting teachers or cutting activities, but what is it that's happening in the classroom? And you have to look at your resource allocation from a long-term point of view. What is it going to take to execute on student achievement? And the easy things, you know, on paper, professional learning or instructional materials, if you feel like you don't have what you need to prioritize to get those, even in tough economic times. All right. One of the other areas that we are looking at the primary level is how are students doing on being ready as they enter. The one thing I'd say about this graph is that we have to discount fall of 2011 because there was a technical glitch in the reporting of the data that year, and so we have to look at 2009, 10, 12, 13, and 14 to get a true trend. And what we see is that the intentional activities both of the school board and of the community around reading 0 to 5 has made a difference in students being ready when they come to school. But there's still room to go. As you see from that fall administration to kindergartners, there's still 40% of the students that aren't proficient based on this one measure, but we have collaborating data from other measures that the schools do that say there's still work to be done to help students be ready before they get to school, but also tells us within the details what it is that is going to help these kids become proficient.
And one of the reasons why we think our kindergarten readiness has improved has been the strong work with our early learning partners and the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which now is going to be taking some steep cuts if the legislature goes along with the Senate's or the House's version for early learning. We know that in Southeast Alaska, Ketchikan has been the one community who has not had the Dolly Parton group, and when they've done assessments, their students are not coming in as close as others, and they're hoping to start doing Dolly Parton just based on looking at the other communities' results with that. So educating parents, free books to all kids is really helping them come to our district ready to learn.
So Barbara is going to talk about how, when we look at all of the work that needs to be done, she and Andy will talk about how that work got started and where it's taken us.
Thank you, Ted. And this is Barbara. And the focus and the intention of sharing the history with you is to share that when the work of equity, a more focused approach started, there was a great deal of confusion as where to start. We knew we needed to start. At that time, back in 2004 and even previous, the common term was the achievement gap. And as we've evolved as an institution, the district has taken ownership to call that more of the instruction gap. And so we needed the data that was shared with you, and we're constantly assessing that data to determine how to be responsive and to measure our progress. This slide on the screen can be found on page 3 of the Juneau School District's Equity Standards Workbook, and a link to that electronic copy of the workbook is on our district's homepage. As it states here on this page, then Superintendent Peggy Cowan convened a school community task force to focus on how to ensure enrollment in optional programs was equitable. We had a lottery system then, and so there was great issues and concern that that lottery was fair. There were those same conversations about optional programs, charter schools, and initiatives, all with a shared goal to meet the unique needs of our Juneau students. The district then back in 2004 hosted biennial school community strategy groups, and there were 5 of them. The first one was on standards, and the second was on Native and minority success, and and number 3 was about healthy attitudes and behaviors, and 5 was on community and partnerships. Strategy 2, as I mentioned, Native Student Success, included participants who became the original members of the Equity Committee formed in 2006. The product of this committee was an Equity Rubric Matrix, which became a great undertaking in intent and in time. It's a pretty hefty and heavy document. And the question before the Equity Committee was, how would this rubric be implemented? What teeth would it have? The turning point in the Equity Committee's work was in finding in our research the Madison School community endeavor to address equity in this school. And after years of community meetings and volumes of minutes and other notes, their work culminated in a one-page policy. Our district followed suit, and with the collaboration between administration and the Board of Education, a draft policy was vetted with the public and other stakeholders and presented to the Board of Education for adoption. Board Policy 1265 was adopted in 2010, and the regulations were added in 2011, and the standards added in 2012. I want to go back to the turning point when in our research we found that Madison policy, and I've shared in the resource slides coming up a snapshot of that, so that in your research you can go back and explore that further, as well as other research that help us and our pathway to find how to develop a tool to move our institution forward. The next screen that follows is, again, in the workbook too, the equity timeline, and it's shared here just as a means for you to get an understanding of how equity has evolved within our institution. And this isn't all-inclusive. There's many things that the district has done and our partners have done that could be added to this. But in 1973, the Indian Studies program was established. In 1995, the Alternative High School established on contract with a Southeast Regional Resource Center. I could go on, and I won't because they're here and you can go back to these, but the importance of reading this and following it is to see how our community has always come together or has contributed to the education of our children to address that achievement gap. So we are now on to another example, page 12 of the Equity Standards Workbook, and Andi would like to explain this slide.
Well, I wanted to give a little perspective too as far as being a school board member in this whole process, because equity is something that you as an organization and the leaders in your organization really need to say this is a value of yours and believe it and ask for how's it going, having your staff know it's a priority, because there are so many things happening and evolving in our district. You can lose sight of a key component that is going to get you to your goal of being a world-class organization. And our board wanted to be a world-class educational setting, and we knew we had to address equity to become a world-class organization, because what happens in any organization when you're serving many, many different people, some people through many different reasons do not have access or are not comfortable with the institution and access to when you're making decisions and going to board meetings and allocating resources. And when you get to a time where you have to cut resources, the many people who come and testify towards you are from one population, and you have to really look out your whole groups that are representative of your whole school population. And we find that in our data, when we're looking at some of our children who are not performing as well as they're capable, and that's the other point that is so important. Our board really recognizes that all of our children are capable, and we really have an instructional gap. We haven't figured out staff how to give the instruction in certain ways. And we do know, rather than as well as figuring it out, in allocating your resources, children some children receive more resources than others. I'll just give an example of summer school. We provide summer school for our special education students who have been shown that they will regress if they do not have summer school. Well, for many of our other children, some of them have great access through their parents' resources to go to camps and outside schools, many things, opportunities, and some of our children don't have those opportunities, and so there can be a regression in summer, and the kids are always coming in at different points, and we can't change that other than this summer we are fortunate to have a grant for the next 3 summers where many of our students who are from low-income families, we are having summer school for them, the LEAP program, where they're just thrilled about this, so they'll be getting, it's mostly STEM activities through partnerships. And so it's a way that we're trying to find resources to help with the need. And what I'm trying to say is equity is political in many ways, because when it's tight and we want resources, we have to make decisions about cutting things. And I'll talk about class sizes. That's been a very difficult issue the last few years, in having to make $11.7 million in reduction, because we know class size matters. You get to a point, it matters, but it is not the #1 in-school indicator of how well your child's going to learn. That's really the skill set of your teacher. But of course, as parents, that's what we want. We all want. I wanted it. That's why I ran for the board, was to vote for lower class sizes when it came to the budget. So we have to keep our eye on the different needs. And having said that, we're remembering all of our students' needs. Our goals for our students is they each get a year of growth. That's what we want. So if they come in and you've got a student on the Highland, we want them to move a year. We want our students who are on lower academic achievers to move 2 years or more, ideally. So anyway, I wanted to go back to how this rubric is really trying to help us build awareness of what equity is, because it starts with that, with our community knowing, because our schools are a reflection of our community, and we will make change when we all understand. People often testify, it needs to be equal. This school gets this, so my school should get this. And as we showed you at the beginning of the slides, one of our schools is 42% poverty. Another one is 13% poverty. There's different needs that come, and the district needs to give extra resources to make those students come more up with the kids in the 13th school poverty. So anyway, this slide is on employees, and when our professional development starts with our staff, this rubric is looking at how are we as a district helping our professional staff know about equity, and we would just rate ourselves where we are. And Barbara, you can probably tell me where you think we are right now on this rubric. I can guess too, but you're helping with this. And we are not where we want to be. We're in progress. I'd say we're a 3 progressing, and we're striving for 4s. But you know, you're going to always be striving on this. And the rubric we have one on our school board. We picked out the one of this example on employees, and there's many. This is professional development. In the rubric online, there's one on ongoing professional development, hiring, evaluation of employees. So there's different levels to look at it. But we wanted to emphasize that so you could see an example of how maybe you could look at our rubric and guide it for your organization.
It's also not a punitive model. It's a growth model, and it's one that one can self-assess and then even rate their own entity accordingly. Originally, the matrix was laid out more as a means of being an either-or, where there would be action taken if one wasn't meeting a particular standard. But again, this is a guiding tool, and it helps to help individuals and institutions grow. We mentioned in the next slide, this slide is the equity rubric matrix. This is just one page of that heavy, cumbersome work that the original equity committee pulled together. And so as the work evolved, we looked at this rubric and aligned it accordingly to a growth model. As you can see up here, there is the indicator, the expectation, needs improvement, and serious concern. And it certainly, we thought, wasn't in the best interests of supporting our staff and ourselves to highlight the serious concern as it was to provide those supports to help us all grow. The next slide shows the resources that have helped inform and guide the construction of the draft language of the policy and the regulations and the work. I wanted to point out here that the guidelines for preparing culturally responsive teachers and schools and boards were adopted by an assembly of Alaska Native educators beginning in 1998, and the next work came about in 1999, and then school boards was added in 2002. The guide to implementing the standards were produced by the State Department of Education and Early Development in 2012, and I wanted to put this on the screen to show you that what this tool looks like, and you can access it online for the purpose of the contents where it shows how to come together as a team to organize a team approach step by step. And on page 3 of that particular tool resource, it outlines that, a pattern, a process that would be very useful. The equity audits to create equitable and excellent schools was very informative and helped us to define and own the definition of equity in education. And for each and every child, this was brought to our attention by a community member who asked us if we were knowledgeable of this. And again, this is a summary that was put together by Secretary of Education in 2013. All to say is that while we're focusing on our institution, equity is a national and global topic, as we all know. The next slide are more documents that informed our understanding and help us grow in the conversation and action of equity. Beyond Heroes and Holidays is a compilation of many essays and articles written by those discussing equity in education. What's important about this one is the Juneau School District hired Enid Lee to help us look at and assess our schools. And we conducted equity audits, classroom by classroom, teachers that volunteered for her to come into their classroom to do an equity analysis. And that was an interesting process, and it was a very personal approach where she asked the teacher, what is it you would like me to look for? And she focused only on that and gave them feedback only on that. And Enid has many documents, and you can Google her online and find her site and find other tools. The other documents here, Indian Nations at Risk, that's another document that is a summary of papers commissioned by the Indian Education Nations at Risk Task Force of the U.S. Department of Education back in 1990. This commission actually met in Juneau in 1990, and then they went to D.C. and San Diego and Palo Alto. But it's still a document that is a worthy read. All of that, again, informed our process. And that Sonia Nieto, that's an awesome resource to have on your bookshelf. We are on slide the Board of Education Policy 1265, and it reads so powerfully and beautiful. that, Andy, would you like to read that? Just as it is.
The Board of Education believes that every student deserves the opportunity to learn in a world-class educational setting that is respectful and free from bias. The board champions, and the definition of a champion is to defend and support the cause of. The board champions the dignity and worth of all people and recognizes that identification and removal of systemic barriers are essential to achieving equity in education. Furthermore, the board holds itself and its employees accountable in developing and sustaining an educational system that reduces and eliminates discrimination in intent and in results. And you can keep reading on that for yourself a lot, and I think you should. It's good. The board worked long and hard with the community and many members and some significant stakeholders to get this document to where it is. And you can follow on the next page our rules and regulations. And this was when Barbara was saying when the policy was adopted, a year later the rules and regulations, and 2 years later the equity, I think you said the equity standards book, because adopting something and then saying what does this look like, how does it measure, how are we going to evaluate our practice, is something that is complex. But I cannot tell you how important it is as a lens. On our board, every board meeting when we have an action item, there's always something, pros and cons, the background, the recommended motion. We also have an equity section on there. What is the equity lens on this?
So if you go on to the Juneau District web page, you'll find a link to the equity standards, and wanted to give you a reference. This is the cover that you would be looking for to know that you found that document.
So the next part is the preamble to the standards, which make actionable our beliefs about and our commitment to equity. And so you can look at that. And if we turn to the next, go on to the next slide, you look at the different components. And when you look at the standards, I wanted to draw your attention front and center to the board, because every year you get new board members. You have an election. And equity is something I am constantly learning about, understanding myself, my biases that I have. We are all looking at that. And when we have new members come in, their definition of equity, sometimes it looks more like equal, meaning equal, and we have to always look at that and discuss that. And our goal is to come to consensus around that, the understanding, and to make it alive about what we are meaning with that. And we have much work to do, even with everyone in our employees, and when our staff comes on every year, which is why in our employee section we have a part on new staff induction. And there's a lot of details behind the scenes about when to do that, and it's complicated, but so it has to be a priority. We cannot lose sight of it, and it's easy to lose sight of it. And those of you who work in large organizations know how true that is. Anyway, the front and center of the board, when we hire and evaluate the superintendent, you can start out with a number one is like the process to hire the superintendent is closed to the public. That would be not a good equity thing to some of the community participates in the process, and goes on up where you have representatives of your whole community and it being accessible. And then we have, when we use committee or task force, this is when we help them formulate and facilitate a group. Do we have all the voices from our community at the table? We oftentimes get one segment who will want to volunteer, which we're very grateful for, and we have to work really hard to get other voices at the table sometimes and look at, do we need to be going out somewhere different? Anyway, and our conduct at our board meetings, our budget process, all of these are very helpful to us in our work.
In the workbook is a process for completing an equity analysis, and it's defined here in 4 steps on the screen, and that's extracted from the workbook. You identify the standard and subtopic applicable to the scenario that you wish to analyze or that's come before you, and describe it, and then refer to the performance indicators and rate where you think that situation fits on the rating scale. And then the last action is to determine, well, not the last action, but the end of the analysis is to decide what actions will be taken as a result of the rating that you gave it. And refer back to the rubric and determine, again, what may need to happen to address it, to resolve the issue or the situation or to improve it.
So one of the things that occurred to me when I started my new role this last July as a director of teaching and learning, immediately following being a principal at a school, was that all of this work that had been going on at the district level and at the board level and in the committee level, there are a lot of us that were peripherally involved but not entirely understanding what all of that work was and what it meant to us at the site.
Hey, Ted, could I interrupt for a second, because there's a very important piece that comes before this. So we have a policy and we have our regulations, and Juneau, it was last year, we had a group called Conversations About Race. It was community members who formed, and one of their concerns was about schools and racism. So it broke into a subcommittee, and they looked at our equity rubric, and they said, hey, you're supposed to have equity committees. Are you having equity committees at all your schools? And it made us look at our policy and parts of our policy that we were not implementing as we said we were going to do. And so there's an example of a community group who's concerned and looks at their schools and says, hey, where is this happening? I've talked to some employees, they're not aware of this. And again, as we're saying, hey, we've got this wonderful tool, you can see that we are growing and trying to make it a livable, breathable document. And I really wanted to say that because Ted is talking about how sites were really wondering, how do we do that? And he's going to show how he made it easy. But I want to say that thanks to the Schools and Racism Subcommittee group, they pushed the board, who then the board said, how is this going, and directed the superintendent to check on it, who then went down to Ted. So take it away, Ted.
Okay. So, and that's exactly when I walked into the position, that was a question that the school board had asked of the superintendent, and the superintendent then asked me, so how is this going at the sites and what do we need to do next? And so one of the things that occurred to me was that at the site level we had been peripherally involved but not clearly understanding what the task was for us at the site. And so one of the things that Barbara and I determined needed to happen was we needed to go to each of those groups personally and explain what the intent of the board was in passing this policy and of adopting this workbook, and how to use it, how they would want to organize themselves at the site level to do the work, and then what is it what is the work and how do we do that work at the site level? Because at the sites there was a lot of confusion and a lot of I'll use the word fear because I think there was a fear of, you're talking about equity and are you going to find that I am not an equitable person or that I don't act in an equitable way. So we had to also let people know, like Barbara said earlier, this is a growth model. What we're helping you do is analyze your own work and analyze your site work, and for you to find the places that you needed to either reallocate resources or spend additional time working to improve access to students so that they can be successful. So we did that. We organized to go first to each of the site staff meetings to present in person the equity workbook and the policy, and then also to talk about what they were being asked to do. And so on this page, it talks about areas an equity committee might investigate. So first we defined what an equity committee would be and where they might organize it, knowing that they as a staff are busy with all kinds of things that they have put on themselves and things that have been put on them by others. How can you organize this? And so we let them know there's flexibility in that. You can make the equity committee part of your site council. You could make it part of your leadership team. You can make it a standalone committee. If you saw a different way to do this work and another place to organize it, you can do that. What we're going to ask as a district is that you're tracking the formation of the group and the work that the group is doing. And so once you have decided how you're organizing it, please report back to us what organization you've come up with. Then, what is the equity committee looking at is their initial analysis and their initial goals. So you see they might be able to investigate attendance, student achievement, parent and guardian involvement, student referrals to the office, looking at their student backgrounds, their family backgrounds, their staff backgrounds, and how those either match up or don't match up. What are the nature of requests for money by the school for students to participate or to be involved? What are you providing for student training and behavior expectations? So we basically were providing them with a brainstorm list of areas that they could analyze and determine for themselves, this is an area that we should focus on for the next period of time. And so then the group would, after identifying those areas, look at what the goal was when they were done with their time period, set a time period for the work to take place, and then establish a measure of, so when you've reached the end of this time period, how will you know that you've reached your goals? Then to help them, because as Andi said, it's easy with everything that's going on to lose focus and just let it sit. One of the things that we established was they would need to provide a report back to me, which I would then forward to the school board 3 times a year. So at the beginning of the year, the report is how are we organized and what goals have we set and what time frames have we set to do the work. At the mid-year, where are we with our work toward the goal? Have we accomplished goals and set new goals? And then at the end of the year, how did you do on the attainment of your goals? And what are you thinking about for next year? What are the new goals that you're putting into your school action plans? Because in June of each school year, each school looks at their overall data, their sub-data, and make determinations in their action plan that they turn into the district what they believe they need to work on for the following year to increase student achievement, not just their overall, but for each of the groups and students that they're concerned about. So then last in that presentation and then follow-ups with the administrators at the sites were questions that they could ask themselves or things that they should consider. So, you know, how would I access this information if I were student X or family Y? Put yourself in their place, assuming the best intentions and anticipate barriers, and then designing your experiences and communications with the audience in mind and being reflective. So one of the questions here is, what happens if the equity committees don't accomplish their established goals? Part of what our approach is that we don't want this to be a gotcha. What we want this to be is a growth model. If they're not reaching their goals, or if we're finding that they're having a hard time gaining traction with their committee, that it'll be a conversation that I have with an administrator of how can we help make this happen. Do Barbara and I need to come to your equity committee? Do we need to help you set committee dates on a calendar so that we're assured that the meetings are going to happen? Can we help you with getting people onto the team? Maybe you need help setting goals. We can come and help you with that. So we want to be service-oriented as far as helping this to happen, and for it not to be a scary thing. My own view on it, and Barbara and Andy might want to add to it, but my own view is that if we turn it into a gotcha, it's going to become even harder to have that work happen at the site. So we need to always be building them up and saying, you know, you struggled here, you weren't able to get it, but what can we do to help? How can we make sure that we make more progress during the next time period?
Very good. In the interest of time, I'll just summarize very quickly the slides that follow. The Equity Board work sessions, the importance of this slide is the questions. Are we improving in our ability to meet the needs of the learners in our schools? And the other three on the bottom, how can a shared vision and understanding of equity in education throughout the system improve our institution? The other slides that follow, the definitions of racism, this was brought to the board, and the board embraced it, and we're still unpacking that and understanding that these three definitions. Again, this is quote here is from the summary of that was presented to the Secretary of Education and their findings. It's a beautiful quote. And the last slide that's very critical too is the available resources. We provided this for you to do further research. It's what guided us, but certainly what isn't here but is before you, I'm sure, is in your entity, references to public policy, personnel policy, federal and state policies, and specific to you, personnel policies and how you should interact with your clientele. And so, again, if you visit back some of the tools that we've cited, I'm sure you'll find a process to address the needs at your entity, your institution.
Thank you for your interest in this. We're working hard, and we will continue to work hard because we have a lot of work to do. And just reviewing today for this presentation, I was saying, oops, we're not doing that. Oh, we're, and we know that we will have to work to keep this on the front of our minds if we're going to be a world-class school system where all of our students thrive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, and thank you all. And I know we are out of time, but if folks have any questions, they can type them in the chat box, and I'm sure Barbara, Andy, and Ted, do you mind if I pass along your contact information if folks have follow-up questions?
That would be great.
Okay, perfect.
And then we'll get to you the final slideshow so that you can forward it to folks.
Excellent. Yeah, so I'll send an email out with contact information and the slides from today. And again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to either me or any of our presenters. So again, thank you so much, Barbara, Andy, and Ted. We're really glad you were able to join us today and share about the great work that's happening here in Juneau. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Cami.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.